Right.
What would
What do
be
you?
your opinion as a fan and somebody that's inside of the business, hand in hand, that it seemed almost at the beginning, and you probably read a lot more online stuff than I do. It seemed that like the beginning there was like a honeymoon period, with AEW, and it almost seems like people have, correct me if I'm wrong, started to turn on them. Do you know why that might be?
I have no idea, but I think one of the biggest things that nobody talks about with the AEW conversation is that 5 months into AEW's television run, the entire world shut down and there was this worldwide pandemic, and whatever energy and buzz that we were just talking about completely came to a screeching halt because they just had to figure out a way to make television when you couldn't put people on planes and you couldn't put fans in the building. So I would have to think that AEW figuring their way out through 2020 and still remaining on TV had to have something to do with that.
Right. Plus, too, let's talk about another. In retrospect, if you look at that, coming out of the pandemic, how everything was kind of like, wrestling was in this weird place, and entertainment was in this weird place, and then I think this one scene will just be looked at about when Roman came back. And you show me sitting in the room, and it pans back, and he's sitting next to Paul Heyman. Mm-hmm. And it's like from that point on, WWE's been on like an upward trajectory, like from that moment, like they've been on that trajectory. When you watch the shows these days, like what are you a fan of, and what were you a fan of growing up?
So I'll start with growing up. I became a huge fan in the Attitude Era. It was Austin McMahon was the big storyline that sucked me in. And up to that point, I really hadn't watched any wrestling. I was obviously aware of wrestling because it's kind of in the cultural zeitgeist. But I went from watching 0 minutes of wrestling a week.
What were your hobby? Like, what were your interests that you get?
Fishing was honestly one of them. I was fishing an insane amount, like 200 days a year or something.
Right.
And I played baseball. And of course, I grew up in Canada, so I played hockey as well.
Right.
But I had one of my best friends when I was 15. He loved wrestling. And if you remember in the 90s, if you had a good friend, you talked on the phone all the time, right? Isn't that crazy?
Right.
Exactly right. On Monday night at exactly 9:00, our phone calls would abruptly come to an end because he needed to watch Raw. And we were in the middle of talking about something, and I'm like, okay, we're not done talking about this. I'll put it on, and when it comes to a commercial break, we can hit mute and we can finish talking about what we're talking about. And I remember turning on Raw on TSN in Canada and just getting sucked into the storyline. And I was like, oh man, I was so drawn to The Rock and the charisma that he had both in the ring and outside of the ring. And like, look, the storylines were just, I don't know, they were larger than life at that time. And the rosters, both on WWE and on Nitro, were just stacked. So I went from watching no wrestling to watching everything. And now I watch a lot, although I will say the great thing about watching wrestling now is you can keep up with what's going on by watching clips on Twitter, clips on Instagram. And this is a roundabout way of me saying, guys, ratings don't matter. Everybody talks about ratings all the time. People watch television so differently now than they did in 1998.
That's true. However, to the point of like you make that, the wrestling business kind of, wrestling fans follow the product. They follow that, like you said, you can catch, a 15-minute, you can take 15 minutes catching up on all the wrestling for the week if you just, instead of the 9 hours, it was 7 hours it takes, right? But the wrestling business needs people to watch the shows to get those to get the rights, these massive rights fees for the advertisers out. And if they're not like it's almost this new way of viewing the product is kind of like, it's improving the business because a lot of people are engaged, but it's hurting the model of the business that drives the money that they make,
It's hurting the legacy version of how broadcasting worked in the past.
Right.
But like people always go, 8 million people were watching Raw in 1998. Yeah, absolutely. But 103 million people watched The Rock return on social media in the first 24 hours. And I know it's apples and zebras here. I know that they're two completely different things, but one of the biggest things nobody talks about is WWE is the 10th most subscribed YouTube channel in the world. They're making a ton of money on YouTube. So There's a different stream for revenue there that I think will, I'm not just saying it's YouTube, but there's different streams of revenue that I think that are going to make their way into this as we go into the next 5 and 10 years. I mean, look at how much WWE is branding every pay-per-view now, or every PLE now.
Right. Yeah, this is true. Plus, what do you like today? What are you a fan of?
I think what MJF is, I guess, was doing in AEW, I think was must-watch TV. I think now that Randy's back, I think that he's just so good, so crisp in the ring. I love watching him. I'd say if there was a show that I'm going to watch every single week, it's going to be I watch Raw and I watch Dynamite, and really just anything that's going on there.
You don't watch SmackDown, huh?
It's not that I don't watch SmackDown, but I live in California. All the other shows come on on East Coast time, so I can watch Raw at 5:00 and watch Dynamite.
Right. Yeah, I'm in the West. You're absolutely right. Yeah, we got to watch.
SmackDown comes on in my house 3 hours after it's aired.
Yeah.
So, and also
it's like you can't be on social media because you're getting spoils.
And I have a 7-month-old daughter, so we're going to bed pretty early in this house.
Right.
Yo, what up? This is Conan, and I host Keeping It 100, my co-host, Disco Inferno, unfortunately.
Well, I'd say you're my co-host.
Listen, every Thursday here on Spreaker, we talk pro wrestling, sports, movies, music, TV, pop culture, and some politics. It's everything the rest of the pro wrestling podcasts are not.
Tune in to hear myself, the superior one, educate and inform.
Tune in to hear me bury Disco.
That's very disrespectful.
Join us every Thursday on Spreaker and keep it 100. Boom!